misconception was that they said in the United States, companies will fire you if you have a medical condition. Once again, this is completely false. No one's being fired from, from UPS in the United States because they have AIDS. This is completely untrue, once again. I have two questions I want to share with you in this debate. My first question is it fair? And my second question is, which one is better? So opposition harped on for most of their speeches about the uninsured, and like we said, many do out of choice. They also said Americans are unhappy with their healthcare system, but an OECD report showed that Americans, on average, are happier with their healthcare than Canadians. Why, you ask? Because Canadians don't like to wait for vital surgeries. They don't like to have to be told that after they paid tax money for 25 years, they're not covered for an expensive drug plan that's going to cost them another $100,000 in the next 10 years. They don't like this because they're getting hit twice. Secondly, and when you compare the two and you want to see who's going to be better off, someone who doesn't have a lot of money in Canada versus doesn't have a lot of money in the United States, the person in the United States saved paying that tax money for all of those years and then has that money to pay for the surgery later on, while the Canadian spent all of it in taxes and then had to spend even more on drug plans. They also said that people who have pre-existing conditions can't get health care, and this is also not true. This is exactly the reason why the United States has a lower cancer mortality rate than Canada, because people are getting this type of care that they need. They are actually being exposed to the very best doctors. On to the next question of which system is really better. I can actually admit here that Canada does have a better healthcare system. If you have a cold, if you have a runny nose, if you stubbed your toe, if you want any of the big surgeries, if you want a hip replacement or anything serious, you go to the United States because they're faster and they're better, and if it's your life and you only live once, you don't want average care, you want the best care. As well, there actually are varying levels of healthcare. Nicole talked about how you can, pay the best and get the very best, or pay less and still get a great value of your healthcare system, because the United States average healthcare is better than the Canadian average healthcare. And we'd say that equality really doesn't exist in our society. In the same way that some might get the Mayo Clinic every Tuesday and some might not, some people drive Ferraris and some do not. This is simply what happens in the world. Like, we can't promise complete equality. And if you want to talk about prejudice and discrimination, it's completely more fair in the United States when if you have the same health insurance, you get the same health care. But in Canada, the wealthy and the powerful, those who have friends of doctors, get to skip through the line continuously. In the United States, they don't push surgeries. People simply want it because they take care of their health, they're covered, and even if they're not, there's guaranteed health care in the United States. They turn away no one, and if you're living once, you want the best. That's why we're proud to choose the United States. Thank you.
I thank the member for concluding the debate. I invite the debaters to cross the floor and shake hands. So at this point, we would like to ask if there are any questions that any of the audience members would like to share. Nicola?
Well, just out of curiosity, what do each of you think, like, outside of the debate about this resolution?
Anyone want to go?
I'm from Canada.
Yeah, I'd love to see you on the other side, both of you. All you guys.
I'll take the United States.
Canada.
I wouldn't really want to drive all the way to the United States, so I'll go with Canada.
Any other questions?
There is a big money thing involved. We have a old friend living with us now who spends half the year in Florida, and he's got serious back cancer problem that he's been dealt with. He says that if he didn't get up to Canada quickly with it, that he might be as much as $1 million, which he could never begin to pay. I have sleep apnea. I have to sleep at night, and if I don't have that machine on, I will stop breathing 17 times an hour. I have a friend who would stop breathing 38 times an hour if he didn't have it. Well, that little machine costs $1,600, and OHIP in Ontario pays $1,200. My teacher's superannuation pays $300, so that machine costs me $100, which means that anybody in Ontario, no matter how poor he is not going to lose his ability to sleep at night, because I know what happens to you. You get to the point where you wake up exhausted. So that's one indicator. It is a money thing. I've got a son who practices family medicine in New Hampshire, and that same machine, that $1,600 machine, exactly the same machine down there, costs $3,500. So it is there is a big money problem involved. And that is perhaps the strongest argument on the Canadian side in this thing, that there are too many people who, well, when we didn't have any of this earlier, when I was a child, doctors had to, well, what they did was, the nicest thing that happened was they charged their well-to-do clients lots of money, and they just didn't charge those of us who didn't have a job or couldn't pay. That's the way it was. It was all noblesse oblige. It was socially good in many ways, but doctors, of course, were enormously admired. Were terribly close to you, came to your home, all that sort of thing was part of life then. It was a different kind of society with a different attitude to life. We in North America, it seems to me that we worship individual rights as opposed to community rights. That's basic to our culture, and there's a price for that. I'd like to see it balanced. I see with our indigenous people, they seem to have it more balanced. But that's another subject.
Diane, did I hear you say that the only place to live the American dream is in Canada?
I think you did.
It's fantastic.
Yes?
In the United States, President Obama and his administration recently looked at the best healthcare systems in the world in order to come up with their most recent amendments, and they looked carefully at the Canadian system, and they rejected the what they call the public option, meaning the government option. Any comments by our speakers as to why that might have been?
I can touch upon that. I think President Obama in his earlier days actually endorsed the public system and the public option, and because of huge public upheaval over the public option, I think there was a lot of misinformation being perpetuated, and I think there was just a general public kind of saying, we don't want a public option, and a lot of people saying they didn't want it, not really knowing what it entailed, and I think that ultimately brought it to the wayside rather than the actual, the public option in its true form. I think it was a lot of people standing up and saying they don't want it, kind of scared of being socialist like Canada. I personally like socialism. I think it's a good thing, but I know America kind of deals with that differently, and I think it was ultimately the public opinion that brought that down rather than the legitimacy of the system.
Here?
I agree partly with Lewis. I think it was the public opinion that brought it down. I don't think it was because Americans were misinformed or they were fed propaganda. I think it was because they didn't want the Canadian system. They didn't want the wait lines, crowded emergency rooms, the wait, all that. They'd rather their user-pay system where you're responsible for yourself, no one else.
This is kind of a broader question for both teams. Do you think healthcare is a human right? It's a human right. Do you think it should be something you are forced to provide for yourself? Do you think that it's something that in our society, as a society that respects human rights, our government, our society should be forced to provide some form of healthcare, decent healthcare to every person?
As we kind of touched on our side, I think what qualifies as a right is something that you need in order to have the opportunity to be equal with other people. So that's why I think education is a right, because without that you're denied the opportunity. Same with healthcare. But obviously, as Harris said in his boil down, having a Ferrari isn't a right because a Ferrari isn't necessary to be equal. So that's sort of where I draw the line, and I do think healthcare does fall into that category.
I guess this is the one place where I sort of divulge from the Canadian system, and that I think that healthcare is probably a choice in the sense that in the American system, like we said several times, you have the choice, you have the potential ability to obtain healthcare, but not necessarily